Hey, this is Chris from Don't Let Them Burn. Welcome to the program. Don't forget you could find us on dontletthemburn.com. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook. You could also email us if you have any questions. This is Don't Let Them Burn. And in this segment, it's called Amazing Machinations, Episode 2. If you don't know what a machination is, it's basically an evil plot. But before I get there, I want you to check out this is our Teespring store. You can get a shirt, a mug, you know. This is one of our popular shirts right here. God is holy. If you want to support the ministry, people like this shirt. And they like the other ones too, but that's our popular one right there. So as we move on, we're going to be introducing my guest, Carl Teichrib, because this one is about his book, Game of Gods. Carl Teichrib, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good, Chris. I'm looking forward to our discussion this evening.
Oh yes, glad to have you. And you have an amazing book here. As we discussed before, I didn't get to read all of it, but you have done all the research, been on the boots on the ground, and all this stuff to the Burning Man and the UN and all these other places that people don't go. And so, before we start, if you could just introduce yourself to the audience and let them know who you are.
Okay. Um, well, I'm a Canadian. I'll start off with that. I live in Canada. So, hey, if people want to know which way I'm voting, if I'm voting Republican or Democrat, I can't vote at all.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah.
But it's kind of crazy to watch what's going on south of the border in your country. My goodness. Um, my background, I'm a farm boy. I come from rural Manitoba, grew up on a grain farm, pretty simple, pretty basic. Um, I worked for a senior program, a senior support program for a time in my home community, a little village of 800 people. And I was working under a board of directors. They were helping me run this senior support program for the elderly to help them stay in their home as long as possible. And most of my board of directors were either members of the Masonic Lodge, the Eastern Star, or one of the other three different affiliated lodges in my community. And so I was under a lot of pressure to join the lodge, but I never did, Chris. But
Hmm.
things were said and things were done, and I write about this in the book. Um, some of my board members took me out for a supper meeting, two of them, and were asking questions why I wasn't joining the lodge. And I was asking questions like, are you guys about politics? And by the way, we'd already run through all this a few times. So I already knew the answers. Are we about politics? Are you guys about politics? No, we're not about politics. Are you guys about religion? No, we're not religious. What do you guys do? We make good men better.
Mm. Okay.
Whip de doo, whatever that means. And
Yeah.
then one of them said something to me that changed the course of my life. He says he looked at me with a straight face and said, "Carl, we're not Satanists." And I went,
Mm.
"Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Why would you say something like that?" The thought had never entered my mind. And this is in the very early 1990s, Chris. And that began my quest to try to understand first Freemasonry. But then by the mid 1990s, I was researching and trying to understand different occult and esoteric philosophies, movements, programs, campaigns. And I jumped full time into being a researcher, even though I still had my job. And by 1997, I was a full time researcher. An author by the name of Gary Kaw brought me on to help him do the research and the writing for his book, The New World Religion. And so from 97 to 2001, I lived in the state of Indiana, helping Gary work on his book and release his book. And from 2001 until now, I've been doing the same thing full time, except at a freelance level, and then also with the introduction of my own book, which came out pretty much 2 years ago. Well, it came out 2 years ago this month, August, or pardon me, October the 8th.
Uh,
And my forte, Chris, has always been I tried. really, I'm a researcher first. I like the research. That's where I go. And so a big part of my work has been to try to attend conferences, gatherings, events, everything from the United Nations Millennium Forum going back 20 years. And already before that, I was attending some world government meetings starting in 1997, going to interfaith events like the Parliament of World Religions, attending pagan gatherings such as PantheaCon. I attended that in February this year. Um, and that was the largest gathering of indoor gathering of witches and Wiccans in the world. Going to places that most Christians, number one, don't know, and if they do, most people wouldn't attend or go into some of these locations.
Yeah.
And I'm going primarily for the research angle, um, and I also attend events like Burning Man and other cultural events. And in the past, I've gone to a number of transhumanist events. So what I've done with my book Game of Gods is brought all of those elements together in one volume. And it's really a documentary. The book is a documentary about where we're at in terms of this intersection between politics, religion, philosophy, culture, between technology, and try to establish where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And not just that, how did we get here? And so for your audience who have never heard of me before, that's my task. That's what I do.
Yeah, very intriguing. And I remember you sharing some notes with me from one of these conferences you went to, and it was pretty freaky stuff. We won't
Yeah,
get
that was PantheaCon. That was back in February, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And man, I'm going to show you guys what's in that book one day. But uh, so you go for the research, but you also do some witnessing as well.
Yes, yes. And specifically we do that at Burning Man. I went to Burning Man the first time in 2017. Um, I've been to a regional one before, also the same year, and I've been to other events that had some spin-off, some had been certainly been influenced by the Burning Man movement. But in 2017, I went to the first burn that I had attended, and we set up a camp. And the camp had a sign in front called "Camp of the Unknown God." We did that in 2018. We did that in 2019. Of course, this year, because of COVID, it's whatever. It's all changed.
Yeah.
And that sign and that camp has become a lightning rod. We use it as an open door to
Yeah.
talk about Christianity in a place, Chris, specifically where Christianity is so often mocked, because Burning Man mocks a lot of things. But one thing they really mock a lot of is Christianity. And we're there to have serious discussions, to talk about it in a serious way.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and so that's been an outreach for us.
Mm. Well, there's one thing I want to talk to you about before you get into the book. And for people to understand the climate that we're living in, and this isn't, when I ask you this, is not so that I already know your character, so it's not about disparaging people and talking bad about them, but I want you to really let people know and understand that the amount of pagan activities is so ubiquitous that your next door neighbor or that next door neighbor or the neighbor next to them could all be involved and you would never know.
Or your own family members. Oh my goodness, Chris. Yes. I
Yeah.
mean, we live in a post-Christian era. That's one of the arguments I make in Game of Gods. We live in a post-Christian era. We already are surpassing postmodernism, another argument that I make. And we have entered the age of what I call re-enchantment. And it's not my term, but it's a term that I think is accurate. And yes, it's your neighbor, it's your kids. Don't think it's just for the young. It's your grandparents. In terms of where our culture has gone. Listen, when we reject Christianity, and we have also rejected modernity, uh, And we have entered the era of postmodernism. We did that in the late 1960s. And postmodernism ultimately just left us with questions and no answers. It said that we have we have a pushback against authority, we have a pushback against power, but at the same time, it left a vacuum of meaning, and that vacuum of meaning has to be filled with something. And the culture has already rejected Christianity; it's even rejected hard materialism for the most part. And so, what's it going to be filled with? Well, a new spirituality. There's going to be a new spiritual interest. And boy, have we seen that come.
Yeah.
Everybody now is spiritual. Nobody's religious. I mean, how often do you hear something like, like that? I'm spiritual, but not religious. Well, what
Yeah.
in the world does that mean?
Right.
But that's the time we're in.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So we're in this season of October. You know what time it is. So we're getting closer to that dark day. So I just wanted you to air that out for people that still want to dabble in this stuff, not realizing that this is some real dark stuff, and people still can get pulled out of it through the saving grace of Jesus Christ. So with that, where do you want to take us? Take us on a trip. This is your book. You know it inside and out. Let's see what you got tonight.
Take us on a trip. Well, hey, how about let's go on a brief trip back in February? You and I met at Billy Crone's studio.
Mhm.
That was later February. I had just returned from doing a research trip to San Jose, California, where I attended PantheaCon, the largest indoor gathering, as I said, of witches and Wiccans.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, Chris, the thing that strikes me going to events like that and to other pagan events, and this goes back to your comment you made a few minutes ago, it's ubiquitous. It is all around us. It's your neighbors, it's your family. Um, the worldview of Wicca, the worldview of witchcraft, really is a religion of nature, and that is something that comes out frequently when you attend conferences like that. A lot of discussion about this being a religion of nature, and I find that fascinating because Paul speaks specifically. The Apostle Paul speaks, specifically in Romans chapter 1 about this religion of nature, and Wicca is just simply that one expression of it. But the bottom line is the question, who do you worship? Do you worship the creation, which is the religion of nature, or do you worship the creator, the one who made nature? Which is it? And one of the things I think is so important for people to wrestle with, as Christians or not, regardless of where you stand, but we need to wrestle with this. What ultimately constitutes reality? Well, the world says reality is all one. God, man, and nature are all essentially the same. At the core, all three realms are interwoven with each other: man, God, nature. Everything is divine. That's oneism or oneness. The biblical worldview, on the other hand, is no, it's not all one. Reality, my friend Dr. Peter Jones puts it this way, is two or twoism. I like to call it otherness. That is, God is separate, distinct, different than nature, different than man. He is in a category all on his own. There is no comparative points that we can have with him. He is completely separate and distinct. He is other. Now, how you view those two questions of reality, oneism or otherness, how you view that, what you accept, will now paint a picture for you in terms of how you view politics, ethics, morality, gender, law, the role of education, religion. The list goes on. Art, culture. There's really nothing that doesn't get painted by the brush that you use when answering that question. Is
Yeah.
reality oneism or is it otherness?
Mhm.
And that, Chris, I think is I mean, it's so foundational. It's so basic, but boy, oh boy, it plays out in such nuanced and intricate ways. And
Mhm.
really, that's what Game of Gods is all, a big part of it is exploring oneism versus twoism. and then how specifically a documentary of how oneism launches itself into politics and into religion, interfaithism, into technology through transhumanism, and then into evolutionary culture through events like Burning Man. And along the way, I take you with me on trips to pagan gatherings, to educational conferences. That's one of the very first ones I go to, and allow you, the reader, to be able to see from an inside perspective what's being talked about, how they view the world, their thoughts, their hopes, their aspirations, their agendas, and then juxtaposing that against the biblical worldview. So we have a foundation, we have an understanding where we stand in relationship to this world that says everything is one. When the biblical world says no, it's not. God is different. God is holy.
Yeah, and their worldview is like, if when you become a Christian, you're born again. Everything after that, as you grow in sanctification, becomes about God. So there's just the opposite, and they go towards oneness and everything that blankets everything.
Right.
Yeah. So we live in a time where we live through headlines, headlines, and we miss a lot of information because we're just looking at the headlines. I want you to touch on environmentalism since it connects straight to oneness.
Oh boy.
Loaded gun, huh?
Oh man, Chris, no kidding. And it is a loaded gun. Um, and some history is really important with this. Allow me to just step aside for literally 2 seconds. I'm going to take my headphone off. I'm going to put a book in front of the camera. Hang on, hang on. This is important.
And here it is, folks. Game of Gods. If you haven't seen the cover yet, that's his book. Here we go. Carl Teichrib, Game of Gods. Pick it up.
Sorry about that, Chris. So,
Okay.
when you talk about environmentalism, and of course, today's big talking points is about a Green New Deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
In your country, it's about the Green New Deal. By the way, those same discussions are happening all over the place. It's not just in the U.S., but the U.S. I mean, that's become an election issue. That certainly has become a point of contention, and rightly so, because the Green New Deal is, I'm sorry, it's dangerous. Flat
Yeah.
out. It's just dangerous. It's wrong. It's dangerous. It's worshiping creation. That's what it is. So, some history on the environmental movement. And I do bring this out in the book. I've got a section where I talk considerably on the environmental movement and some of its important touch points. And the first really important touch point, and there are others before it, but the really important one happened in 1970, April the 22nd, 1970. And that was the first environmental teach-in, which became Earth Day.
Yeah.
And so a book was published and distributed to tens of thousands of school children, tens of thousands of college students. Roughly 20 million Americans participated in the first Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. And that, Chris, that becomes that hinge moment when the culture begins to shift. And all of a sudden, we're now very aware of the environment and very aware of environmental and ecological concerns and looking for answers and looking for social change to try to find some of those answers. So this book came out, distributed to schools, and it was distributed to even my school here in Manitoba. In fact, that's where this copy comes from. So what's in this book? I mean, it's a big book. Remember again the audience, school children. Well, the very first essay that you read chastises Christianity and says that Christianity is the root problem behind our technological issues, and we're not going to find any ecological solutions until we reject this old religion and find a new religion. And then later on in the book, I think it's on page 321, goes into a list of acceptable ecstatic religions that are closely aligned to the earth. And some of them aren't even religions, but more philosophies or ideologies like Marxism
Ah,
Uh, yeah, Teilhard de Chardin Catholicism, Druidism, the list goes on. Quakers and Sufis, shamans, and it's all about being on the winning side, the ecstatic side where you're connected to the earth, you're connected to each other, you're connected as one. I mean, there's predictions in here. Like Paul Ehrlich's, he's got some essays in here. He was back then, and still is, um, like kind of the world's foremost thinker in terms of population, uh, overpopulation, and I mean, his book The Population Bomb came out, I think, in 1968. He had
mhm.
essays in the Environmental Handbook. He was saying things like, "Hey, by 1980, the world's going to be, I mean, it's gone, it's done because of overpopulation." There was a lot of doomsday scenarios, doomsday thinking. They were looking for a Green New Deal back then,
Yeah,
and the Green New Deal was Marxist red on the inside, and had not just simply a veneer of paganism, but really was essentially had a pagan construct where our only real concern now is to the earth. It's back to Mother. It's back to Gaia. Well, that was 1970. The world has sure changed since then. Now, what I've just described, that's a dominant principle. That's what we teach our school children all the time. Um, I do a little bit of custodian work at our local elementary school. It's just a small school. I think it has like 35 or 40 kids. I mean, it's a really small school, K
yeah,
to 8. And the books I've seen in their own library basically are just, this rewritten for kids.
yeah,
Um, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Now everybody celebrates Earth Day. Everybody from Toyota to the U.S. Department of the Army has Earth Day campaigns. Every school, it seems every community at some point does. This is now where we gravitate to as a culture. We're looking for some form of spirituality rooted in what is material. We are looking for some sense of wonder, some sense of purpose. Um, Again, we've rejected Christianity. So where do we find that purpose? Where do we find that meaning? Well, you can call it the mystical material or the spiritual secular, or call it reenchantment, or call it pagan,
yeah.
because that's where we're at.
Right. And it's a what they're doing is an amalgamation. It's like the one world religion. You know, we have this oneness, and everybody's accepted, but you gotta boot Christianity out, or at least we can accept the fake ones. Because they'll go right along with it. Nice
Right.
reflection there. So you live in Canada, so I know that this movement is flourishing up there. I can give examples of what I know, but I want you to give examples because you live there of how environmentalism has taken over.
Oh, sure. Well, it's taken over all over the place, but here we're paying for it now. We're paying for it through a carbon tax. That's one way we're paying for it. So we have a carbon tax. It's a tax on things like fuel. In fact, everything essentially can become taxable because everything runs through a supply chain that uses energy. Well, of course, it uses energy. Everything we do uses energy. We're creating energy and we're using energy all the time. But in my country and in other countries, um, and if the Green New Deal in your country comes to fruition, you'll be paying carbon taxes too.
Hmm.
So you just add taxes on top of taxes. That's probably been, besides the worldview aspect, the most daunting side of the environmental movement is you will pay, and you will constantly pay, and you will pay more. You will bleed money to make the world green, but it doesn't do anything. First, we make the assumption that the world's environment is in trouble. Maybe it's not. There are regional issues and regional problems, sure, but do we have truly global magnitude problems? Climate change has been demonstrated to be really problematic. The science behind it has been challenged, has been countered, and rightly so. We already now have, what, 30 years of climate change hysteria. climate change propaganda shoved down our throats. I mean, the world should have burned up a whole lot of times already, right?
Or froze.
Or froze. Exactly. The narrative becomes too big to fail, and so you all pay for it. Literally, you all pay for it, and it doesn't get any greener because it's already pretty green. If we're honest, if you take the time to get out of the city, you're going to realize it's far more green than you realize. Animal populations, forests are far more healthy than you realize. Besides the ones that get set on fire, and
Oh,
some of that is man-made,
yeah,
or
absolutely.
or due to poor practices or whatever.
Yeah.
There are issues. There's no question. There are definitely some ecological issues at the regional and local levels. But man, when it comes to what's happening in Canada, this becomes our focus. We're here to save the earth. We're here to save the planet. The very first event I went to was called the Global Citizenship 2000 Youth Congress back in 1997. And Chapter 1 is all about that. Chapter 1 opens with it. Chapter 2 is all about that. And the Global Citizenship Congress was all about restructuring Canada's education system so we could save Mother Earth because we're no longer children of Canada. Instead, what we are is we are all divine beings. All religions tell us we're divine beings,
Yeah.
and we need to save the mother. We need to save our Mother Earth. And so, over the space of 3 days, I watched as about 300 school kids were given this propaganda, and it was highly charged. It was very emotional. Um, and since then, I mean, this is 1997. Since then, I've watched as my country and your country and other nations have pursued the environmental movement and climate change, particularly, as the reason to say we need global governance. We need one world. We need to bring everybody towards a common purpose. We're here for the general good. We want to do this for the sake of the future, for future generations. We never, of course, explain what that looks like or what that means, but we all need to sacrifice and sacrifice constantly. And here's the thing: we're sacrificing in Canada with our dollars, but it's a sacrifice. We sacrifice with good works. We sacrifice with money. We sacrifice with pledges towards the mother. We sacrifice with saying, I'm going to devote my life to saving the planet. Does that not sound like religion?
Mm-hmm.
Does that not sound like a religious undertone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is, because it is a religious undertone. It is religious. It's Romans chapter 1.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, got a couple of things written down here. All right, so before I go to the other one, what you see here is, because I know you know a little bit about technocracy as well. Technocracy and environmentalism run lockstep with each other. Let's touch on that for a little bit.
Yeah, it does. It does. I'm going to grab my glasses here. Okay. I talk about this event and this document in my book. I didn't attend this event. This is 1990. But this event was called, this event was a precursor event to the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, all right? It was a gathering of about 3,000 world political players, major delegates coming from all over the place to talk about what's going to be anticipated at the 1990 Rio Summit. And chapter 2 in this book, or in this document, not a book per se, is entitled Towards a Global Constitution, a global green constitution. In terms of technocracy, I'm going to just backpedal a bit. If you go back to the official movement of technocracy from the 1930s, it was all about we need to create a new economy based on energy credits. Okay, which is very similar to the idea of creating carbon credits, what we're talking about even today in today's climate change movement. Well, that was the same kind of stuff being talked about in this document, and specifically in Chapter 2, Towards a Global Green Constitution. What we would need is a type of technocracy where energy would be would be managed. We would have one child. Um, Here's an underlined piece. Unmanaged wilderness does not present a human management problem. With a stroke of a pen, a wilderness can be set aside, as previously mentioned, left to manage itself. It goes on to talk about what needs to be really managed. Here it is. It is the human population that needs management, not wildlife.
Mm.
Interesting. So I've got a section really well highlighted. Let me read that to you because this hits. All right. Again, keep in mind, this document is saying we need energy credits. We need to restructure around a technocratic system of human management. The issues are not about if a global politics is necessary. The question is, how do we achieve binding agreements in law, complete with effective programs for applying sanctions against noncompliance that would oblige each nation, regardless of size, to abide by a set of principles that are required to guarantee the survival of life on this earth. At this point, it sounds kind of blah, 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 but the author is saying, hey, we need to come up with some way of ensuring against non-compliance. If you're a country that doesn't go along with the environmental movement, we got to find some way to bring you on board. So here we go. Perhaps we will find that there is no other alternative to a system of rigid controls that some would equate to a police state.
Mm.
Unfortunately, in order to save the planet from biocide, there had to be very powerful constraints from doing the wrong things. The constraints must transcend national boundaries, be whirled around and enforceable. There would be a need for an agency for preventing eco-vandals from acting unilaterally. Enforcement agencies would need the power to act without being invited by the offending nation. Therefore, there needs to be an agency that is acceptable to all nation states on the planet. We can probably accept the fact that there will always be one or more nations that will not go along, but there must be effective sanctions in place. If sanctions do not work, then physical occupation and the installation of a world trusteeship would be imposed upon the offending nations. So the title of the event was the World Environment, Energy, and Economic Conference with their official theme, Sustainable Development Strategies and the New World Order. Now, it doesn't mean that idea comes to pass. But the very fact that they are willing to think that, inside, how do I say this without sounding crude? Thinking, literally like a police state to make this happen, that they are so driven to ensure that the world is saved that we are willing to enter into a police state or put together a world trusteeship. On and on it goes. I mean, the document is very telling. Again, it doesn't mean that this happened, but this was the background, some of the background thinking to the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. And it's important for people to recognize, all right, even though the 1992 Rio Earth Summit and some of the other environmental conferences didn't go that far, not even close to that far, they did do a lot of stuff, a lot. It just demonstrates the thinking that goes on behind this, behind the scenes.
Yeah, very interesting stuff there. And I'm trying not to go off in some rabbit trails. I'm very tempted to. But since we're over half an hour, I want to get into certain parts of your book. But I'm going to touch on something else before. Two things, and is how they lobby Hollywood to put these themes in their films over and over and over. I mean, goodness gracious, it's for a long time now. Also, we have people in the oneness movement or the witchcraft movement or whatever. We make fun of them. We call them tree huggers. These are the same people that'll lay in the street to stop a truck to go into a forest. They'll cry for the trees. They'll
Yep.
put fruit statues and whatnot, just weird stuff. And one time I mentioned on the show regarding what's going on in Canada is where I should have brought up the article tonight, but I didn't. And people, if you don't believe me, you can go look this up yourself. Okay. They have a machine that they put on cows, they strap it around them, and it touches their rectum and it catches the gaseous elements coming out of there because that gaseous element is going to destroy the planet. It's just ridiculous.
I know. It's over the top, isn't it?
Yeah.
We will do everything to save the planet. Ah.
Yeah.
Here's what I want your listeners to understand. What we have just been describing is an alternative salvation message. That's really what this is. This is the world saying we're going to save ourselves. We don't need Jesus Christ's salvation. We don't need God's salvation. We will save ourselves. We will save the planet. We save ourselves. Chris, I have heard that directly. When I was at the 2018 Parliament of World Religions, the closing statements given by the chairperson, he made it very clear that what we were engaging in was the salvation of the earth. And when we save the earth, we save ourselves. I have a lot of people say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist. But what I am is somebody who's looking at the theory of what the world is saying in terms of how they want to save themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what the world will do. If we reject Christ, we will look for some other salvation message. We'll come up with it. We'll find our own answers, our own way forward. And it always ends up becoming a bloody utopian nightmare.
Yeah. I was just about to say humanism leading into a utopia, but it would really be a dystopia.
Right.
According to the Bible. Right?
Yep. And even according to human history, show me where any of this stuff works.
Right. Yeah. And it's mingled in with socialism and communism, Marxism, as you said before. And people don't, if you have to get it's like you have to get the ingredients of the pie or the cake to make cake, right? You have to understand these fundamental things to understand environmentalism, oneness, and all this other stuff. There's a lot of, and that's why I wrote the book.
Right.
So one question I should have asked in the beginning, because I want to lead into something else. Why did you call it Game of Gods?
Okay. I struggled with the title, Chris. I really struggled with the title. I've written a lot of stuff. Okay. I've written, I don't know, 250 articles. I always struggle to some extent with titles. And it just wasn't coming to me. It just wasn't coming to me. I went for a long walk and I was frustrated. I came back to the house and my son looked at me when I returned and he says, Dad, he says, really, you're writing about a game of gods. Everybody's playing God. They're all playing gods against each other. Like, you're right. That's exactly what we do. We play games of gods. Not that we are God, but we think we are God. We think we're masters of our own meaning and destiny. We think we're the ones who are going to be, create the kingdom of heaven on earth. We think that we're the ones who are ultimately divine. All we're doing is playing games of God. Yeah. Except in this case, it's really games of divine identity theft, because we're now imputing upon ourselves what God's role really is, and that is to save us.
Yeah.
And so this is a game of gods, but it's a losing game. It's not a winning game.
Right.
So my son was the one who came up with the title, and I'm like, you're right.
Okay. So there we understand that he had an inspiration from what you've been talking about.
Right.
But I want to get into the issue of the gods. And you've told some fact, because we've had you on the program. If you haven't checked out the program before, we had him on here before. He said some crazy stuff about Athena showing up to people. At least that's what people are telling you. And she's calling herself Athena, and she wants worship. Right. This reminds me of the movie or the TV show American Gods, where the old gods lost their savor, and the internet, all the technology took over, and that's the new god. And so it's this clash, there's this war going on, and the old gods are coming back, and that's kind of what you described on the last show. So take us there, take us to the God aspect, the gods.
Sure. I open up chapter 7 with an encounter with a goddess,
Mm,
not just an encounter in an abstract way, but face to face.
mm,
In chapter 7, um, let me just read you just a little excerpt. And again, this was with my family. All right.
yeah.
And you're right. I have been to events, specifically pagan and witchcraft events, where they talk about how Athena, how Pan, how various gods or goddesses have approached the pagan participant and demanded worship, or requested now to enter into a relationship, a personal relationship between this entity claiming to be this ancient god or goddess with a modern practitioner of witchcraft. That's actually what I just described is fairly common. It's not that unusual. So here's chapter 7, bringing us around a little bit in a different way. An imposing goddess stood before my young family, bold and commanding, dressed in glistening gold. Around her wrists were bracelets made of delicate snakes. A hideous Gorgon head was visible between her breasts, and she wore a lavishly decorated helmet with 3 combs. Protected by the goddess's battle shield was an ominous-looking serpent, head erect, body coiled, its tail slithering behind her feet. Against her left arm rested a spear almost as long as she was tall. In the palm of her extended right hand was a winged figurine-like character. The room she stood in was impressive too. Ancient-looking statues and sculptures lined the walls, and the high ceiling was held in place by vaulted colonnades. It was a setting that invoked a sense of awe. My wife and son had entered the majestic room first, immediately catching sight of the diva. Our 5-year-old daughter, holding my hand, noticed her as well. How could you not? She was the center of attention, and her deadpan gaze rested on all who approached. Daddy, my daughter's voice sounded distant in the expanse of space. Why are we looking at a false god? How perceptive. There we stood, the 4 of us, in the grandeur of Athena's temple, the Parthenon, staring at a 42-foot tall gold-gilded image of the goddess of war. No, we had not been magically transported to ancient Greece. We were in Nashville, Tennessee.
Uh, uh,
So if you want to go see the gods and goddesses, open your eyes. You have statues, especially, Chris, in your country. And chapter 7, the first few pages goes into that, how in the United States specifically, you have taken the imagery of ancient pagan gods and goddesses and elevated that. You've elevated that imagery everywhere. It's so prevalent. It's that they are your national monuments. They are the deities that cap the top of your Capitol buildings.
mhm.
Um,
Statue of Liberty.
Statue of Liberty, yes. I mean, America is the land of Christian churches with crosses coast to coast. Ironically, the emblems of democracy and justice and liberty are images from ancient pagan days.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to go very far, and you see examples of it. I mean, you're in California, your state seal has an ancient pagan goddess on it.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
we haven't gone too far away from that stream of thought, have we?
No. And from NASA um, to some of our roads and streets, when they come up with something new that's scientific, they have to name it after something pagan. There's a drone out there called Argus. Argus was the old god with the 100 or whatever it was eyes on its body, and the same drone has 1 million cell phone cameras to scan a whole city. If you don't ever heard of Argus, go look it up. But it's named after a pagan god. So we're always drawing from what I would say is somewhat mythology.
That's right. That's
Because
right.
they're showing up with the same names and somewhat the same identity as far as facials or whatever. We have a problem here.
Hmm.
We've turned these people are serious about their gods, and
Yes.
these entities, whether it's fallen angels, demons, have shown up because I wanted to get an aspect. I don't know if you know too much about this, but the aspect of DMT and
Mm.
ayahuasca
Hmm.
and how they go into all of these trances or visions or hallucinations, or however you want to say it, in group settings, and they all see the same thing. They're seeing reptilian or insectoids or whatever else,
The plant spirits.
plant spirits. And these things boil over into our entertainment from,
Oh,
go ahead.
absolutely. No, keep going. Keep going. Yes.
Yeah, from Avatar, the movie by James Cameron. We have the comic books. I can go on and on about that. Man Thing. They're all drawn from the same source. And there was a savior that came that is the source of everything, and as far as good, Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
Lucifer, the son of the morning, the light bearer, has brought secret knowledge to deceive humanity, and we just keep going along with it. I mean, of course, some of our eyes are blinded. We haven't been regenerated by Jesus Christ. So the world system is so corrupt when you start pointing out these things, and because um, people have an affinity towards this hero, this show, this game, they get offended when you say something about it. But here, it's becoming a reality, so to speak, when these things start to come back. Not that they ever truly left, but now in our modern culture, our industrialized nation are seeing what's already off in Africa, what's over in South America, and every other, undeveloped country. These people are used to the bright spirits, the sprites, you name them. There's so many different names coming to them, beautiful, not ugly and ravenous and dripping drool. They're coming as beautiful fairies, which are demons, and here we are, Burning Man, Paganicon, and all these. Go ahead.
You just described re-enchantment.
Mm,
You just described re-enchantment, where we say no to Jesus Christ, but we recognize we're still spiritual beings. We
mhm,
intuitively understand that. We intuitively know that, and so we're drawn to the world of spirit.
yeah,
And because we are willing to worship the creation rather than the creator, we tend to forget that even the spirit world is a created world, and they will come. Historically, the nations around Israel, and Israel itself in the Old Testament, you see that this becomes a problem, a serious problem for the people, as the Hebrews are struggling with the idolatry of the nations around them, the acceptance of those gods and goddesses.
mhm,
Um, hey, I've been reading through the Book of Numbers, and in the Book of Numbers, you see that God is leading the people. There's fire, there's smoke. He's in their midst, and yet at the same time that there's an attraction, and you see this in different parts of the Old Testament. There's an attraction back to the pagan ways. Why is that? Why is it that we're always drawn back to this? And I'm seeing this within the realm of our culture right now. We're always being drawn back to this.
yeah,
And so, I look at secularism, and I'm not the one who coined this, but it's true. Secularism is just simply an intermediate stage between the rejection of one religion and the acceptance of another. And the rejection of the one religion is Christianity, and acceptance of the other is the ancient pagan religions, the
Mm.
ancient pagan ways of thinking. I make an argument again in the book that really what we are encountering is an ancient future worldview where we look to the future. It's technological, it's advanced, it's evolutionary. That's the language that they like to use, but it draws from the ancient pagan world. It draws from the ancient past. There's nothing
Yeah,
new under the sun, Chris. There really
yeah,
is nothing new under the sun.
absolutely. And somebody said that DMT is created natural, and I know that it is created naturally in the body, but they take it
Hmm.
to another to an extreme by high dosages. And the science, you can look up the articles. The scientists are using DMTs to try to get humans to make contact with so-called aliens.
Hmm.
Uh, isn't that substance abuse? Right.
at,
So
at, at Burning Man, DMT, ayahuasca is discussed in a number of the workshops I've been to. I've listened to panel discussions on ayahuasca, DMT. Um, I've gone to workshops on cryptocurrency developments where the person giving the talk, first of all, prefaces it about his time coming back from whatever it was, like a 3 or 4 day ayahuasca journey.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. Well, I want to touch. I know you probably don't have. Well, then again, you know what? You've been in some of these game and chat rooms for the UN or whatever else conferences. But before I go there, the the same ubiquitous nature of the pagan movement that's in the films and the TV shows now, it's been creeping. No, it's been flooding the video games for
Hmm.
I think the last decade or two. And all I'm seeing is darker and darker. But what the thing I'm noticing is they're starting to get to the point where it's more scientific
Mm.
and horrifying, you know? And we talked about this on another show where it's starting to blend now. Science, like they say in the cult, science and magic is one of the same. You're seeing this now in the video games. It's on the movies too, but the video games is really the what's peculiar about the video games because it becomes this escape. Everything's an escape, but an experience that you are you become that character. You're not
Okay.
observing the character. You are the character, and so now you're dabbling in what you don't realize is the occult.
Interesting. I've read some studies of spirituality and video games. I'm not a gamer. I enjoy playing some games, but I'm not a gamer. Though I have been quite involved in virtual reality, from Second Life to well, just this last Burning Man was all done in the virtual sphere, and so I had my Oculus on. Actually, it was my son's Oculus. I got to get my own. Quit borrowing his. And I mean, I've been inside Second Life and virtual world since I guess 2008, 2009. I think it was '09 when I really jumped into it. And in the virtual world, I mean, I've gone all over the place in Second Life, and specifically looking around to seeing, okay, what kind of pagan sites there are there, and there's a lot. There's an awful lot.
Yeah,
But the gaming side of it, I keep hearing this, Chris. I've heard it from you. I've heard it from friends who are some quite involved in the gaming world, and they talk a lot about pagan elements that are constantly being reinforced in World of Warcraft or whatever the the game, the hot game is at the time.
yeah,
Um, so we can't get away from this, can we? It's either in Hollywood, it's in the gaming sector, or if I mean it's we're literally kind of like washing ourselves in pagan mythology and in the esoteric ideas behind it.
yeah,
Um, and so the light of Christ will shine even brighter as the world becomes even darker. And I think this is one of the things that I'm hoping and people get as they go through the book, especially the last chapter or so, is that we're supposed to be ambassadors for Christ in this time. If you go back to the early church, back to the let's say Peter, Paul's time, their world was completely awash in a pagan in pagan beliefs. When Paul went to Athens, um, it was awash in pagan culture, pagan temples, pagan priests, Rome. Um, my goodness, this is something that I think the early church, if they could now see where we're at today, they would go, "Oh, I recognize this. We
Yeah.
have a different world, sure, but
Hmm.
we recognize the spiritual worldview behind it because they were living with it all the time, and it was much more raw and much more real back then.
Yeah.
But they would see where we're going. They would understand this, that we're moving away uh, from the God of the universe and embracing the creation itself.
Absolutely. And so, with the little time we have, well, somebody's asking a question, but I'm not sure if you're ready to answer that because I know from the question he's asking, it's a long explanation. He says, "What do you all think about Hades, Tartarus, and the Abyss?" Too loaded, or you want to go there?
No, that's okay. I mean, that's a huge conversation. How much time do we have, by the way, Chris?
Pretty much 4 minutes.
Okay.
So sorry.
Put it this way. I don't want to be in any of those.
Absolutely. And that some of that topic was touched on Codex Explained with
Okay.
um, Donald Perkins, Judah. If you want to go back and look at that, is in Codex Explained, I believe, episode 3. But anyway,
Okay.
Carl, what are your last words? What do you want to leave people with? Because we're going to have you back, and just take us out. And what are your last words?
Well, I think a big, how do I say this? Quit being afraid. Quit being afraid. As Christians, quit living in fear because we see the darkness of the world, and either we want to put our head in the sand and think it's not happening around us, or we cower in fear. Listen, um, every knee will bow. Chris, every knee will bow. When I went to pagan events, and this really hit me at Paganicon in 2000, oh, when was that? 2019, when I was at Paganicon. I watched a ritual called the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, where we had it was pretty dark. I mean, there was body piercing, there was bloodletting, there was blood drinking. It was a full on ritual,
Mhm.
and I'm there observing as a researcher. And the first 10 minutes, I'm feeling pretty uncomfortable, and rightfully so. You should be uncomfortable. And then I was reminded that every knee will bow. That means every pagan knee will bow. Every secularist will bow. All the spirits behind the evils of this world will all bow. We bow in love to the one who created us, to the one who saved us. Eventually, everyone will bow, whether they bow in fear or they bow in love. I would prefer to bow in love. So, why are we afraid? The greater is he that's in us than in the world, right? We say it. Do we believe it? Are we living it? Do we take a look at all these topics as important as they are? And do we recognize that ultimately it should point us back to the fact that Jesus Christ is the one that saves us, not mankind? That we should quit playing our own little games of gods and look to the one who is the true God.
Amen. Where can people find your book? You got a blog, a pod. Let people know where to find.
Best way to read, just to read excerpts of the book and to find out more about it is gameofgods.ca. Gameofgods.ca. You can also find me on Facebook and on Twitter. Lord willing, down the road, I'd like to get a podcast up and running. I've been playing around with that idea for quite a while. Got another website. Been waiting to get that up on the web for a while as well. But definitely gameofgods.ca, and then just find me on social media.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Carl Teichrib. Can't wait to get you back in a few days or whatever it is. It's been fun. I hope that everybody's learned something and that you could take this and spread the gospel. and glorify God and spark some interesting conversations, because this is the world we're living in. We can't ignore it anymore. It's getting darker. Witches are the main talk. They're doing everything they can to gain attention along with the Satanists, and it's getting very popular. So we can't ignore it. This is the world we live in, a post-Christian world, and we are the salt and light through Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. So, as we always say, as we end this program, don't let them burn.